Welcome to the Music Reel. I'm your host, Nicola Burton, and I am so thrilled to introduce you to my guest today. Today I'm speaking to award-winning British music artist, composer, producer, Nitin Sawhney, who is one of the most distinctive and versatile musical legends in the world today. Thank you for joining me today, Nitin. How are you going?
Well, I'm still recovering from that introduction you just gave me. I don't know if I agree with that, but thank you very much. It's very kind of you to say that.
Absolutely true. Absolutely true. Now, how are you going over there right now? So it's morning, you're in your summer. How are things in, I mean, you're not in lockdown anymore. It's still a bit of a twilight zone though, isn't it? What's it like?
Exactly. Well, there's a lack of clarity on all of that. But I think really, from my point of view, it's just about being careful as much as you can and just really, being wise and cautious and thoughtful about other people. And in every situation, just thinking through what the best thing to do is. And there are guidelines, but they seem to shift quite a lot to the point where it's quite difficult for people to follow them or to know what the correct thing is. I mean, they've changed so many times. But generally, when I go indoors in any place that isn't my home, then I generally wear a mask. If I'm outside and I see quite a lot of people around me, I'll wear a mask. And otherwise, I'm kind of, I'm trying to keep my interaction with other musicians or other people down to Zoom interviews or Zoom conversations or Zoom kind of collaborations. But I mean, a few times, recently I was with Jules Holland in his studio, and that was actually really nice. It was lovely to be with other musicians there. And we did talk about wearing masks, but I think we all decided it was fine in that particular situation because we had all been quite careful. So we thought, okay, we trust each other and let's just see what happens. But we were still keeping social distance and so on. So yeah.
It's such a surreal place to find ourselves in. I mean, we snuck you into Australia late last year for a few shows, and you are normally traveling the world. So what was it like not to travel, not to get in a plane and then be in lockdown? What was that like for you?
Yeah, it's been crazy. I mean, it's very weird. I mean, I'm not earthbound for very long generally, so it is quite weird for me to be in that situation. And I miss traveling a lot. I'm used to spending a lot of time in other countries and meeting different types of people from all over. And so to really, not have that. I mean, it's just I think everyone's adapting. Everyone's having to think in a very different way and to look at things in maybe a new light and to find positivity in everything that is going on right now, which is hard. I mean, especially against the backdrop of so many people having passed away. But at the same time, we are being pushed as humankind into revising our ways of thinking about how we interact with the world around us, not just other people, but the environment we're in, and also how we engage with things that we took for granted to some degree. I mean, music is something that we always have just imagined will just continue on and go in the same way that it always has. But even in recent years before lockdown, I mean, it's been increasingly difficult for musicians to work in the way they had done. The day of, CDs and albums and so on is quite. It's a very different kind of world now with streaming and so on. But then add on to that lockdown, where a lot of musicians were making their living from live touring as opposed to album sales, because that was less lucrative than it had been for many artists. So it's kind of now, a lot of musicians feel checkmated by the whole situation we're in, and as a result, I know many people who are considering. I mean, this morning, Crispin Hunt, who's from the Ivors board, and he's the chair of that. He actually said that 64% of musicians were thinking of leaving the profession. So it is quite worrying. I mean, from my point of view, I'm very lucky in that I do a lot of film score work. I make out, I'm making my new album. I produce other people. I do lots of different things, and I'm very lucky in that I cultivated that kind of quite diverse way of thinking about music over the years. But people who are very focused on maybe one aspect of music, whether they're theatre composers or film composers or, you know, or whatever they do. It's very difficult right now. I mean, films aren't getting made. You know, theatre productions are on hold. It's a crazy time.
And that's the thing, is that if you're a young artist and you're coming into your career, you're not looking at it the way that we did. You know, there isn't much to look forward to. In Australia, we can have 100 people in a pub, but no one can dance. Can you imagine? You can't dance. What's it like in London? Is it the same?
Yeah, I mean, but basically there is no, I mean, I think interestingly, you know, in terms of dance, I've worked a lot with choreographers and dancers and so on. So people like Akram Khan are putting together choreographed shows, which I think there was one online last night. But in terms of going to clubs and so on, I personally don't think it's the most responsible thing to do right now, to go to a club. And it's kind of weird because everyone wants to express themselves, and it's, you know, until there is some kind of a viable permanent solution to all of this, it's going to be very difficult for people to know exactly what to do. And I think that it's about being responsible. So dancing, I think, is, you know, in clubs, you know, because you are exerting a lot of energy, you breathe more heavily, you're in a quite sweaty kind of confined space with other people. I just don't think it's a wise idea. I mean, you know, until we have some better grip on what to do about all this. You know, I read somewhere yesterday that they were talking about mosquito repellent being the solution. You know, it's getting to the point where I'm hearing so many different, and that was on the front page of one of the papers here. But I mean, like, you know, we're hearing so many different kind of ideas about what the solution is, but you know, no one seems to have come up with anything that seems viable right now.
Yet. Hopefully they will. Now, you released the song Down the Road in February.
Yeah.
Prophetic lyrics. There's a time we'll stand together. I can't believe that came out in February. And here we are. We have been trying to stand together to protest the glaring inequities that we've seen around the world over the last 5 months. I mean, we've had virus, lockdowns, economic impact. You guys are going through Brexit. You've got the Trump election over there. Oh my God, like, what else can happen in this year? So I'm curious to hear from you, because for me, your music is about, you're telling a story that needs to be told for the voices that need to be heard. So there's so much going on out here. What is your take on 2020, and what do we need to do to, I guess, get to the other side of this?
My gosh, I mean, it's difficult. I mean, I despair. I mean, you know, in 2014, I was on Channel 4 News warning about a lot of what I saw coming. And, you know, I saw the rise of the right wing. I saw a lot of this happening whereby people are taken in by absolute charlatans who are self-interested, greedy narcissists who want to take everything from everyone and who have no care about anyone except themselves, who are racist, who are bigoted, who are misogynistic, who are, you know, and those people seem to have got a massive foothold everywhere right now. And I think I don't really get how they have managed to win over so much of the electorate in so many different places. I do know that there has been a lot of manipulation of information, of statistics. I mean, that's documented now. That's been proven to be the case. You know, we don't really know how far and how deep a lot of that goes. But what I do feel is that we, you know, globally, and it's not just America and here, I mean, it's everywhere. I do feel that there's been the right wing has become very much emboldened to make statements and to normalize ways of thinking that we would have, you know, collectively as nations completely condemned as abhorrent, you know, just a few years ago. And yet suddenly people are saying things, doing things quite openly that are quite shocking and disgusting, and go against every aspect of human compassion and humanity. And I do think that, you know, as a musician, as an artist, I mean, my next album is called Immigrants. I feel an obligation to actually counteract that, and not in a didactic way necessarily, because I don't think that works. People at the moment are not in the mindset to be told to think anything. But I do think to celebrate immigrants across the world, to actually give a different perspective, to ask different questions, to look at, to look at ways of thinking where the agenda of what we're talking about and how we are thinking is not set by people who have interests that are based on their own private agendas and personal, personal enrichment. And, I think right now, I can only try to create music and to be creative in a way that is kind of engaging with the frustration of all of that, I suppose.
And it's just so true, because for us to move forward and recover, we've got to see each other as the same frequency, as human. Yeah. I've never seen so much hatred online conversations. And it's just blows my mind. Here we are at this time when we really are on the same page. We should be. What's your thought on a roadmap to recovery, given that we've seen so much hatred? And also, let's talk about your album in that, because I feel like almost like your music is a blueprint for recovery, in as much as it's all about inclusion. We're all human after all.
Yeah, inclusion is the word. I mean, I think, it's, like I said, I try not to make didactic music, because I'm a musician. I'm not somebody who's telling anyone or qualified to tell anyone how to think. But I do feel that, my obligation as an artist is to be cathartic about what happens and to express my feelings. But having said that, I also think that, my heroes, a lot of the people that I really, at the moment, actually, I think there's, I saw that there was a new series that's coming out. I can't remember which channel it's on, about the history of soul music and so on in America. And they were talking about about people like James Brown and a lot of the artists, who came from like Stax Records, and a lot of the people who came on the back of what happened with Martin Luther King around the time of the civil rights movement. And, when you look at Black Lives Matter, when you look at what's going on with people trying to express the frustrations that have been building up yet again for decades with the way in which they've been oppressed, I think, there is now a kind of strong movement towards recognizing that there's been a systemic and institutionalized kind of, not any kind of conspiracy, because I don't think it's orchestrated in any way, but I do think that there has been an atmosphere and a kind of zeitgeist that has been quite negative, that has come from certain politicians saying things that are irresponsible, from the mainstream media saying and platforming irresponsibly. If you base everything on profit and entertainment in terms of how you platform, then you take the most controversial figures quite often who are going to provoke, and those people quite often will end up being will gain support, and quite often those people are very, very right wing and very extreme.
So moving forward, what's our call to action? How do we?
I think
it's a massive question, right? But look, we've got an opportunity. We don't want to recreate the world the way that it's been.
No, I agree.
We want to do something that we don't want to talk about it anymore. Yeah. What can we actually do, Nitin? And I think music is going to play a part in it. I'm really keen to hear what you think.
Which is why I, with this album, with Immigrants, it's about a celebration of immigrants. When people are demonizing immigrants, and have been for a very long time, I don't think people realize how much contribution internationally, globally, immigrants, have the part that they've played in building countries and building societies and building cultures. The idea that people think of cultures in a very intransigent kind of static way is bizarre to me. I mean, every culture is dynamic. I mean, this concept that there is some kind of racial, that people are in some or indigenous, what they call indigenous populations. I mean, it means something very different in Australia to what it would mean here. For example, the use of the word indigenous. These things have got to be questioned, because, like here, it's used in a very right-wing way to kind of preserve some kind of what I called a kind of anachronistic imperial pride, which comes from the time of the British Empire, and that kind of, and the use of the word indigenous is kind of in that context. So you have to question semantics. You've got to question, whereas obviously in Australia it's very different. I mean, in Australia, indigenous is actually looking at how, I mean, again, the use of the word changes depending on who the oppressors are and how that has worked. So it's kind of about questioning context as well as meaning of words. So semantics change depending on context. And I think that's why it's always worth looking at history. And that's why, Black Lives Matter is important here, as it is in America. Here, I think Black Lives Matter is looking much more at the historical, impact of having statues up of slavers and so on, and questioning that rightly, and saying, I mean, right now there is a controversy going on over here over the use of the word slavers or enslaved in the song Rule Britannia, and so that's become controversy, although many people are saying this is a distraction from what's going on, which I agree with to some extent, in terms of it's not really where our main focus should be. We should be focused on the fact that this government has been totally incompetent in handling the coronavirus epidemic, and also in terms of generally their attitude towards race and so many other issues, and the economy and Brexit and all kinds of stuff. But having said that, Rule Britannia, the actual use of certain words is a symptom of a mindset, and that's what people don't get. Some people are saying, well, why do that? Why would you change words? Because it's actually, it's about recognizing that there has been a history that has been totally unfair and has oppressed a lot of people to benefit the people who the white people who've actually whose ancestors were here many years ago, so hundreds of years ago. So the point is that it's about recognizing that. In the same way, in Australia, it was appropriate to have the reconciliation movement. I mean, that was actually about kind of looking at the history of what happened and saying, well, we need to redress that imbalance that has been entrenched in the way in which everyone thinks.
And we have so much work to do. We have so much
Absolutely.
more to do. And we are a country in Australia, apart from our First Nation people, we're all immigrants. For all of us, we all have so much to offer, and it's really an opportunity, isn't it, for us to come together and go, right, this is what I've got. What have you got? Let's create something really good together. So I've got my fingers crossed that this lockdown can actually be an opportunity for us to actually make some changes. What do you think?
One of the greatest things when I was in Australia many years ago, I was at the Garma Festival with I'd been invited there by Mundawai Yunupingu, and Phil Ruddock, I think, turned up to give a little speech. And I remember he actually said, he was talking about some of the refugees who were on Christmas Island, and he was saying, oh, we really don't want these boat people coming over here. And I remember Mundawai shouting out, but you are the boat people. And it was kind of like, and I kind of
so
think
true.
it's really interesting, this kind of this idea of entitlement, where it's about people, the thing is, in terms of immigrants and so on, it's actually about history, context, behavior, and how people are, where is the compassion, where is the humanity, where is the kind of, where's the fairness, where's the equitable thinking. We need to be, we need to, as a society, look at how everyone is treated, and also when we have, I mean, particularly over here at the moment, the way in which this government is thinking of asylum seekers. I mean, the idea that we've now got Priti Patel here, the Home Secretary, actually appointing literally somebody who's called a clandestine channel threat commander, which just sounds like some kind of joke name from some science fiction thing or some kind of mad, absurd comedy. It just sounds ridiculous. And the problem is, that is the attitude that they start with in terms of how they treat people who can only actually claim asylum in the country they're in. Once they're in the country, that's when they can start the process of claiming asylum. They can't claim asylum until they're in, within the borders of that country. So that's why they're so desperate to get into countries, so they can start the process of claiming asylum. Otherwise, they are totally stuck. They can't. And so, those brave people who actually, and that's children as well as mothers and so on, who are braving, international waters. And there's so much nonsense talks about them being illegal. They are not illegal in any way. They're entitled to be in international waters. Here, we only have a 12-mile border around this island where we can say, okay, those are British waters. But if we find anyone in those waters, we are obligated legally to bring them to safety. So this idea of having a clandestine channel threat commander is just nonsense, as if those people deserve any more hell than they already have been through in their lives.
I'm really glad
they're seeking asylum for a reason.
Well, I'm glad that you're talking about it, and we need to talk about it. I mean, my ancestors, I wouldn't be here if they hadn't have sought refuge in Australia. So, we're all in the same boat, literally. So let's talk about your album, Immigrants. When is it coming out, Nitin?
Well, actually, we've been talking about that. I think it's going to come out in the early part of next year, probably around February and March of next year. I'm looking to deliver the final album probably sometime in October. Obviously, we've had 3 singles from it, but the album versions of those singles will be very different from the singles you've heard in terms of how I might treat them. Well, maybe not that different, but they'll be different versions. And I suppose the album in itself, as always, I try to create a kind of feeling of a narrative and try to create something that I guess has its own flow. So all of the tracks that I'm creating at the moment, or working with other artists on, those tracks will form part of a feeling and a narrative. It's kind of very much a sequel to an album I made a long time ago called Beyond Skin, and it's the first time I've done that. I mean, the album that followed, Prophecy, was a very different kind of album. It was where I was traveling around and also included people like Mandawai Yunupingu talking on the album and so on. But this album is really coming from the same place as Beyond Skin, but is a kind of updated way of looking at that. And I'm very glad that we performed at the Royal Albert Hall, and in Australia last year we performed Beyond Skin from start to finish, and that was really helpful in terms of reminding me about where all those feelings and thoughts came from.
I loved that album. I discovered you when Prophecy came out. It was actually a time in my life when I'd given up on music. I couldn't listen to it. You know how sometimes you get to that point where you're just like, I can't. And it kind of reconnected me back to myself. But what it did was actually entrained the whole household. And if there's a gold standard of being a parent, I have this one tick. Each one of my kids have your CDs in their collection. Each one of my kids have your songs on their Spotify playlist. And one of my sons said to me the other day, Mum, wherever we are in the world, if I hear a Nitin Sawhney song, I feel like I'm home. And
what a lovely thing to say.
I feel like I'm home. And that's what you do
amazing.
To connect people. And we all, I've spoken to so many of your fans lately, and they all say the same thing. I feel like it's given me a refuge, a home. So thank you to all the people whose lives you have changed. Thank you so much for taking the time to talk to me today. Thank you so much. And next time you're in Australia, I can't wait to come and meet you.
Oh, that's really kind of you. That's a lovely thing to say, Nikki. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, and look, thank you for talking to me, and good luck with the album and the tour next year.
Cool, thank you. Well, hopefully I'll be in Australia sometime again next year. I hope that happens.
Cool, thanks, Nitin. Take care.
Take care. Cheers. Bye.